This is a Starks LLC production. In a faraway land of myth, magic, and intrigue, a young warrior fights to save his land from the ultimate evil. Welcome to Requiem of the Fallen, Light of Mantra by G.H. Starks. Read for you by G.H. Starks. Chapter 1: Nightmares and Bullies. Chess is a wonderful game. Some play it out of necessity to sharpen the mind. Others merely to pass the time. Chess is truly a wonderful obsession, whether played out over a matter of minutes, days, weeks, years, or an eternity. Chess, my boy. Chess. Jasufa Parias, from the Memoirs of Ralir Nomrai, a collection of sayings from family and friends. A full moon hung high in the summer's night sky, overlooking the wooden cottage homes and dirt streets of Arbor Village. The silver god of the heavens smiled its radiant smile, casting its light on all its subjects, who slept and dreamt of wondrous things beneath its nightly reign. All was silent and still within Arbor's borders that night, except for a lone figure walking slowly along a dusty track at a cat's creep. The stranger was a tall, muscular man of 6 feet, the breadth of his shoulders clearly showing beneath the flowing black cloak he wore. His hood hung so low that it cast the darkest of shadows, hiding his face from sight. He swayed in a slow promenade, like a wraith risen from Arbor Cemetery, in search of vengeance for some wrong that had been wrought against it. The stranger did not peer up as he traversed Arbor's otherwise vacant central road. His footsteps barely disturbed the soft dirt of the narrow boulevard. Instead, he gazed into the dust of the path, because he had no need to see where he was going. He could feel the object of his search, and so knew, without looking, the location of his prey. For a time, the dark figure walked in silence, and then paused for a moment, some 50 yards away from a 2-story home constructed of pale-aged wood. The home's planks were illuminated in the silver light, sprinkled here and there by the shadows of the night. Not moving, he stood in the darkness and looked up for the first time, with his eyes still hidden by his hood. He spied 2 wooden shutters perched on the home's second floor, just above its lower rickety canopy. The stranger raised a black-gloved hand from beneath his cloak, revealing a blue luminescent gem glowing brightly in his palm. The rune, as it was called, held in place by a gold slot embedded within the palm of the glove. The stranger pointed his fingers towards the home's shutters, his hand resembling a 3-pronged orb of radiant sapphire light in the shape of a ram's head. The wind rose to a light breeze, and the shutters, a distance away, nevertheless swung open in silence. Ralir and his new bride, Catherine, slept deeply that night, their individual journeys into dream worlds redirecting their conscious focus to their subconscious wanderings. Their bodies shifted only a little in reaction to the night breeze, which now wafted in through the open window, its coolness touching them gently. Ralia's almond brow glistened with sweat beneath the light of the moon, shining in through the open window. His lean, muscular build, clothed in a white wool sleeping gown, welcomed the cool air. He stirred beneath the thick covers of their wedding bed, a wonderful thing of silver and bronze, beset on all sides by worn walls and splintered floors. It seemed quite out of place in a room which was so obviously in a state of disrepair. Ralia sighed in his sleep, but did not wake. His eyelids remained tightly closed and lay hidden behind the thick, dark strands of his hair, shoulder length and raven black. His fingers brushed at the wet locks, but his hair, defying his unconscious grooming, clung to his clammy skin and the damp fabric of his goose-down pillow. "Father," he said in his sleep, as his eyes danced the dance of dreams behind exhausted eyelids. Neither he nor Catherine noticed the stranger who appeared before the open window in a silent flash of pale blue light. The black-clad figure waved his hand toward Catherine, who began to stir. Her red hair, slender, angular body, and freckled skin were like the subject of a beautiful portrait, one capturing both passion and flame. The stranger moved silently from the window toward the unsuspecting husband and wife. He returned the blue rune to its place inside his robes. Stopping at Ralia's bedside, he removed a second stone from beneath his cloak. This rune was a white rune and gave off a dull luminescence. He held it in his palm as he had the first rune. Suspended above Ralia's head, the rune revealed the face of a young lad no older than 16. But in this day, in this age, Ralia was a man newly come of age. "Young Nomrai," the stranger muttered in a hushed and almost unintelligible voice. "I have a message for you." Ralia's head shook as his mind was gripped by a dream of the stranger's design. The sun high in the noon sky bathed the dirt streets and cabin homes of Arbor Village in its warm light. The jasmine and flame vines that framed the windows and shutters of the homes basked in the sun's rays, as a colorful variety of plants filled the air with their sweet scent. To the east of the village, Arbor's farmers tended to their fields of corn, which stood in rows of emerald and gold behind the town's stable and tavern. In the center of the settlement of wood and glass, a festival roared loudly as a young Ralia moved about the bazaar. The boy observed his surroundings with the most brilliant pair of green eyes as he enjoyed the mix of locals, tourists, and merchants arrayed before him. 8 years of age, he swayed from side to side as he shuffled happily along. The dragging sound of his tan leather boots against the grit of the earthen streets joined the cacophony of sounds that permeated his surroundings. He followed his father, Shivalsa Nomrai, walking just a few feet in front of him. As they walked along, people looked at them in wonder. The father and son were so much alike, and yet so different. Their chins personified the same strength, and their brows the same handsome profile. Ralia watched his father closely, smiling at the thought that in time his limbs and core would grow into the same powerful build possessed by his only surviving relative. Only their eyes and skin told different stories. Shivalsa's fair complexion and blue eyes spoke of a man from the Northlands, a man of the frost. In contrast, there was R'lyeh's almond skin and emerald eyes. These were traits that spoke of a mother R'lyeh had never known. He would frown whenever the absence of his mother's memory touched his heart. An old man dressed in a dirty brown top and cowhide pants spotted R'lyeh through the crowd and yelled to the boy, "Little majestic one," he called, waving a slender, wrinkled hand. The old one, a fisherman, brushed back silver strands of hair matted with sea salt and the sweat of the day. His hair hung loosely over his tanned brow, as he smiled brightly with uncommonly straight white teeth. For a man of his profession and age, R'lyeh thought. R'lyeh noted that the old fisherman wore an odd earring in his left ear. It looked like a rook from a chess game. Chess, R'lyeh recalled. He and his mentor, Jasufa, were very fond of playing the game of strategy, skill, and patience. The latter R'lyeh would learn in time, as his mentor was fond of noting. However, the fisherman's rook had its top sheared off at an angle. R'lyeh thought it resembled a broken plateau, more or less. "How now?" the angler called to R'lyeh in the traditional greeting of the sea. R'lyeh turned his head and smiled at the man. Now he could see it was Nan, Jasufa's friend. "My net is strong," R'lyeh responded with the traditional reply of the seafarer, as taught to him by Jasufa. Then he held his tummy, and an expression of longing crossed his face. "But no fish," his youthful voice squeaked. After hearing this exchange, R'lyeh's father turned and glanced back at his son. He was a bit perturbed, because earlier he remembered telling R'lyeh, at least 10 times, that they were going to eat soon, and to be patient. But after hearing the boy's reply to Nan, he could not help but laugh before saying, "Give it time. We can't just grab the first morsel that looks good to us, R'lyeh. You know this. We have to be cautious, lest we end up with angry bellies and loose innards. Remember the last time?" R'lyeh rubbed his belly again, remembering a rather unpleasant moment in his recent past. Then a rumbling sound came from his stomach, and he grimaced. Shivasa heard the growling from his son's belly and smiled. "Good, you remember," Shivasa said, and motioned with a wave of his hand for R'lyeh to follow. R'lyeh looked back and nodded to Nan. The veteran of the sea nodded in return and smiled brightly at the lad. R'lyeh noticed that before Nan could continue his meanderings, he was stopped by a hooded woman wearing a black veil, hiding her face from sight. She also wore fine purple and black robes. R'lyeh watched closely as they argued heatedly. He could not hear what they were saying, but the woman was definitely not happy. "Hey, you, little majestic one," Shivasa called impatiently to his son. R'lyeh turned to Shivasa and bowed respectfully. "Sorry, father." They continued on through the crowd, and R'lyeh hoped toward a morsel of food. Some roast pork would be nice, he thought. As they strode along, R'lyeh turned his gaze to the dirt of the path and smiled at the name, Little Majestic One. The old fishermen of Mantra, with their lean, salty features, tanned, leathery skin, and foul mouths, had named him that due to his walk. They called it the waddle of the ice, the walk of the birds of the northern isles. A thud, punctuated by a sudden stop, returned R'lyeh's attention to the here and now. He lifted his eyes from the back of his father's long legs. He had failed to notice that Shivasa had stopped before a merchant stand. He looked up to meet his father's gaze. The kind man was a veteran soldier, Grand General of the Mantran army. having spent 30 years in service to the Montran king, the jagged scar about his neck, and the crow's feet at the corners of his eyes told the tale of his many missions conducted in response to the call of duty. Shivalsa looked on his son, and a smile creased his lips, but R'lyeh frowned in embarrassment. "I'm sorry, father," R'lyeh said quickly. "It's all right, my little warrior in training," Shivalsa answered with a loving wink. "Such things happen." R'lyeh nodded, but the frown remained. He always felt such mistakes were beneath him. He was a Nomrai and his father's only son. But despite his heritage, there was never a time he felt he could be the equal of the men in his father's family tales of heroes and successors. Shivalsa smiled and gave R'lyeh a fatherly pat on the shoulder. "R'lyeh, guess what? Now is that time. You want that morsel?" "Well, this is a most pleasant thing. Father and son stopping before Dubai's cart of delectable delights. And not a moment too soon for the choice tidbits I carry, which I assure you are much in demand," a merchant said, catching the duo by surprise. His manner of speaking intrigued R'lyeh. It was full of well-timed hills and valleys, prompting lightheartedness and a feeling of well-being. R'lyeh and Shivalsa turned to find a dark-skinned man of 80 years staring back at them. Though he had been taught to avoid rudeness, R'lyeh found the bushy silver eyebrows of the ancient merchant funny, and he chuckled at the sight. But Dubai did not become angry. His eyebrows were raised in welcome below a blue turban and crinkled brow. R'lyeh was young, and Shivalsa a patron. He nodded with the utmost confidence toward a handcrafted chessboard, which lay on the right corner of his cart. R'lyeh peered at the display, a gold chessboard with a single piece sitting in its center. The blue rook was made of crystal, its crest sheared off at an angle. R'lyeh looked at it, his eyes wide. The board's craftsmanship was better than anything his mentor possessed, and Jasufa owned many beautiful chessboards. R'lyeh's attention to the board was quickly usurped by the morsel of dried seafood arranged on the left side of Dubai's cart. Dubai could see the longing in R'lyeh's eyes, and he smiled, for he knew a cell was near. Dubai motioned with his slender arms dressed in blue robes for the father and son to come closer. Shivalsa eyed Dubai and leaned in cautiously. "So, you know us. Odd, as you are unfamiliar to me," Shivalsa said to Dubai. Few in Mantra were able to draw the connection of parentage from Shivalsa to his son. Yet to Dubai, there had been no problem. "Yes, I am new to your land, and undoubtedly to your eyes. But a master such as I knows his craft, and so know of you I do. The most generous general I'm sure you are. Come, let us talk the talk of coin and trade." Shivalsa eyed the steady hands, warm eyes, and cool demeanor of Dubai, and smiled as his doubts were allayed. "Yes, you are gifted. Please forgive me. Let us barter." "Of course, General. And here's something for your son to pass the time. This is a special piece. Some say magical," Dubai said, taking the blue rook and handing the chess piece to R'lyeh. As Dubai placed the rook into R'lyeh's palm, it began to glow. Ralia stared at its blue luminescence. Shivalsa and Dubai entered into negotiations as a gentle breeze rose and nicked Ralia's ear. The boy's attention was drawn to a nearby cart on which rotten fruit and putrefied meats were displayed. The rancid smell turned and wrenched at Ralia's stomach. Draped over the cart's side was a black banner on which 3 diamonds were drawn, arranged in the shape of a triangle. In the center of the triangle was drawn the symbol of infinity. Behind the cart stood a tall man, the stranger, dressed in black. His hood was raised such that his eyes remained hidden from sight. Ralia winced and placed his hand over his nose as the stranger shook his head slowly, like a parent chiding a child. The stranger lifted a black-gloved hand and pointed his finger toward Ralia's left. Ralia's eyes followed the line of sight from the stranger's pointing finger to an odd-looking crowd of villagers. They were all dressed in black, meager garments, torn from collar to cuff and from waistline to hem, revealing pale blue skin beneath the soiled clothing they wore. They looked at Ralia with dark, pupilless eyes and vacant stares. Their voices rose in a ghostly chorus of unintelligible moans as they swayed back and forth like reeds in the wind. Slowly, they parted in a wave to reveal a small, tortured young girl of 5 years. She stood in the middle of the road, beset on all sides by others of her own age. Each of the little vagabonds was dressed in torn, dirty clothing, the common dress of the village's orphans. She knelt low, screamed, and cringed beneath their taunts. "Leave me alone! Leave me alone!" she screamed. The commotion of the bazaar fell to silence, except for the young girl and the cruel children surrounding her. Ralia looked back and found his father still busy with the bargain of the day. In fact, Ralia noted Shivalsa seemed oblivious to the eerie happenings before him. Ralia shrugged and decided he could handle this one on his own. After all, he was an Omrai. He clenched his fist, took a deep breath, and walked through the strange crowd of villagers, plunging into the circle of angry children. "Leave her alone," Ralia demanded. A pudgy child with large red cheeks and dirty black hair stepped into the circle and pointed at Ralia. "Not your business," the portly bully of 10 years retorted, his belly shaking when he talked. He frowned at Ralia, clenched his fist, and brandished it in the air. But when the little majestic one ignored him, he shook his head wildly, his chubby cheeks flapping in the air. Then he clenched his other fist and shook them together at Ralia. "I said not your business, and if it were, which it isn't, it still wouldn't be," the bully said. Ralia only smiled at the chubby one's awkward words. "Please, leave her alone," he repeated as clearly as he could. In the moment of silence that followed, Ralia looked around to find the crowd of strange, swaying villagers gone. He returned his attention to the bully, who glanced over Ralia's shoulder at a watchful Shivalsa. Ralia did the same and frowned in frustration as his father cast a playful wink in their direction. Ralia kicked at the dirt of the path. His father had been watching the entire time. "I had this," he thought. "He's a Nomrai," the bully yelled to the crowd of children, who scattered, disappearing in a cloud of dust and stomping feet. Ralia watched them go, and then turned to the little girl with whom he was left alone. The little girl ran to Ralia and hugged him tightly. Her stringy red hair slapped him in the face as she threw her head flush against his chest. He spat out the threads of dirty, tangled hair which lodged in his mouth. He tried to step back, But it was too late, as he was swept up in the exuberance of her thankful embrace. Thank you. My name is Catherine, but you can call me Cat," she said, squeezing R'lyeh tightly around the waist. "You'll be fine now." R'lyeh strained. She was awful strong for her age, he thought. Then he looked down at Catherine's freckled face and patted her reassuringly on the back. A long moment passed, and R'lyeh felt it was time to get back to that morsel of food his father had promised him. Placing his hand on Catherine's shoulders, he tried to part from her embrace, but stumbled slightly as a rush of 1,000 unintelligible whispers filled his ears. Soon, he found that Catherine's embrace was the only thing holding him on his feet. He looked down at her as she held on to him as if for dear life. Obviously, she did not hear the whispers, he thought. He knew this because she did not try to staunch the chaotic flow of the unintelligible whispers invading his mind, making him unsteady like his father Shivalsa after having too many drinks at Abba's tavern. In time, the rush of voices faded away, and as they departed, R'lyeh's legs again stood firm. "Thank you," Catherine said, looking into R'lyeh's eyes, her black pearls meeting his emeralds. It was nothing," R'lyeh stammered, finding it hard to breathe, the air around him suddenly growing thin. Catherine withdrew her arms, stepped away from R'lyeh, curtsied, and said, "But it was something. He said you would." R'lyeh took a step back. "I don't understand," he said, as he inhaled deeply, now given the opportunity. Again, Catherine ran to him and hugged him tightly. "Will you protect me from him?" she pled. Sure, R'lyeh strained. Then a gust of wind ripped at the pair as thunder rocked the heavens. To R'lyeh's surprise, in contrast to the stranger dressed in black, a hooded man dressed in long white robes appeared in a crackle of thunder and a burst of ethereal black gelatinous mist. The hooded man ripped Catherine from R'lyeh's side with a pale, emaciated hand and pointed at R'lyeh. "There you are!" The hooded man roared. His voice was an ancient bellow, deep and uncaring. Spouts of ethereal black gelatinous mist shot out from under his white hood, which concealed his face from sight. Catherine struggled beneath the hooded man's grasp as she reached out to her would-be savior. "R'lyeh!" she screamed. R'lyeh looked back toward his father, who continued to bargain with Dubai. The young gnome Rai marveled at the idea that his father had not attempted to intervene.
Why turn to your father now? He can't stop what's coming. At last, I found you, and no one will stop me this time,"
the hooded man said. R'lyeh stared at the hooded man and stood his ground. "Who are you? Leave her alone," he yelled.
Who am I? In time, you will learn the answer to your question. For now, no, the dire pact will be fulfilled. You want her? Take her!"
The hooded man said with malice, shoving Catherine forward. Catherine reached for R'lyeh as he stretched out his arms to accept her. But before he could take her hand, there came a loud roar of tumultuous wind as Catherine's body burst into blue flames. "Cat!" R'lyeh yelled. He ran toward her, but was instantly thrown back by some unseen force.
The pact. You will fulfill the pact.
The hooded man intoned. He pointed at R'lyeh, who was yanked off of his feet and into the air. The hooded man beckoned to him, curling a long, emaciated finger. Its fingernail looking more like a sinister, black talon, 5 inches long and razor sharp. Ralia floated slowly through the air, over Catherine's burning corpse, and toward the hood of their assailant. The closer Ralia was drawn toward the hooded man, the more his mind was gripped by fear. "No," Ralia said. His eyes opened wide as he sat up in bed, drenched in sweat. He shivered in the cool night air entering through the open window. He turned to find his Catherine lying safely beside him. He sighed deeply in relief. It was a nightmare, he thought. Or was it? He felt a sharp pain at his temples. Then just out of the corner of his right eye, he saw a shadow standing by the window. Ralia turned quickly, clenched his fist, and dashed towards the room's open shutters, only to find no one there. Startled awake, Catherine stared at Ralia. "What's wrong?" she said. "Nothing. It was nothing," Ralia assured her, studying the shutters closely before closing them and returning to bed. "You sure?" "Yes," Ralia said. Nevertheless, he held Catherine close as they laid down for the remainder of the night, and maintained a trained eye on the window. And there his gaze remained for the rest of the night.